Hi, everyone. Lots of people coming in. Thank you so much for joining us today. It means a lot to have such a large and engaged group for the launch of our Employee Ownership Capital Roadmap. And we will get started in just another minute or two. Love to have you all pop your name, your company or organization, and your where you're calling in from in the chat, just so we can all connect and know where everyone's coming from. Thank you for joining the conversation. All right. Well, I will start because we have a really full and robust agenda today. And as folks are coming in, yes, thank you for continuing to put information in the chat about your name, your organization, where you're calling in from. We are so excited for this webinar today. It has been a year plus
Mm.
in the making, and many of you have been a part of this process to develop the Employee Ownership Capital Roadmap. So, just huge thanks for all of you who've contributed. We'll talk a little bit more about that and everyone who's showing up today. Thank you so much. I'm Catherine Catcher. I'm the Director of Capital Mobilization and Action Lab here at Ownership Capital Lab, and I'm joined by Allison Lynn Gain, who is our founder. She will be leading us through much of the content today. If you haven't already, there's actually a QR code here on this slide where you can go to the website that hosts the full Employee Ownership Capital Roadmap, plus an executive summary and stakeholder guide. We are excited to kick things off. Next slide, please. So we just talked about the roadmap. We will also put that link in the chat. And today's agenda is really to take you through. We, as an organization at Ownership Capital Lab, really feel like we're co-creators and sort of stewards and shepherds of this work. And so today we're presenting on what we heard over the last year, what the research has shown us, both sort of social, political, financial research, and how we've developed the roadmap, the four recommendation areas, which we call the Employee Ownership Capital Compass, the three central stakeholder groups that we're focusing on with this first inaugural roadmap, which we plan to update annually. And then we're going to have some interactive breakouts, which we promise will not be too scary and won't take too long, but we do want a chance for you all to network and hear from each other, especially around the commitments we can make to expanding employee ownership and employee ownership investing, and then take some Q&A if we have time. So we have a lot on the agenda. While we're kicking things off, I just do want to note that our team is going to put some links in the chat that we will also discuss at the end. We want to make sure that we are not we are sort of a research and action shop. I would put the emphasis on action. We do the research that is needed to ignite action. We will that will always be our focus at Ownership Capital Lab. And our goal with the roadmap is to move employee ownership investing from niche to mainstream. So in terms of the actions that we're going to highlight it today and at the end, for those of you who might not be able to stay for the full 75 minutes, I want to encourage you all to sign up for the Employee Ownership Investor Circle if you are an accredited investor or part of an accredited investor organization. Download and share the roadmap, and also provide us with feedback and input on the road show that we are conducting next year, the conferences and events that we're hosting and being a part of, and really asking for you all to collaborate with us in that process. So those links are going to be in the chat now and at the end of the event. Next slide. Just briefly, just to be very clear, this is an educational event only. We're not providing any financial, legal, or tax advice. Next slide. So before Allison kicks things off with the content of the roadmap, we do want to say some very big thank yous. We consider the people who supported us this year as co-creators. And we spent the last year working with all of you, many of you. This slide has the sort of types of stakeholders that we worked with. Um, Everyone from fund managers to investors, advisors, field builder, policymaker, all of the different types of field building organizations in this space and also in adjacent spaces. We talked to many people who are working in impact investing, general investing, gender lens investing, climate investing to understand adjacent spaces. And there were more than 150 people that we heard from and worked with in this process. Next slide. So there are a huge number of people we have to thank. We want to start with our advisors, some of whom have chosen to remain anonymous. And so these are the wonderful folks that we're able to give a special thanks to. We had more than 45 people who sat with us for individual interviews and provided detailed feedback or recommendations, and we are so grateful. Next slide. Over the summer, we had a wonderful group of student interns who supported us to engage more than 45 stakeholders in focus groups. So these are some of the folks, again, a few remained anonymous, who sat with us and as we conducted focus groups, and we heard from so many people across the field about the current state of employee ownership investing, how it could grow, what they're working on, what are the things that would need to be unlocked for scale. And so we're incredibly grateful to all of these contributing partners. Next slide. And lastly, but certainly not least, this work would not be possible. We had some incredible sponsors who provided financial support, both for our roadmap and the roadshow events that we're planning to do next year, again, to move employee ownership investing from niche to mainstream. And so we're incredibly grateful to these groups who are really standing beside and behind employee ownership investing as a critical piece to transform our economy to work for more Americans. And so that is our thank yous and our appreciation. Thank you to all of you. If you're here today and you are one of the 150 people who contributed to the process, please drop your name in the chat. We are so appreciative for that. If you want to talk about who you are and kind of how you were engaged in the process, we'd love to hear from you all. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Allison, our founder, who's going to talk to you about what the roadmap is, what it tells us, and we're so excited to have so many of you here today. Thank you again.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Catherine, for kicking us off. And again, to all of you for joining us today. I know this is an incredibly busy time of year for the countdown to the end of the year. Yeah, I'm Allison Linde. I'm the founder and CEO of Ownership Capital Lab. And I just want to open with this very high level framing for the Employee Ownership Capital Roadmap, which is the vastly undertapped opportunity to turn the dial on what is the scalable solution of employee ownership to address really two converging systemic risks, which are first, wealth inequality, which we know is at historic levels. And I'm not going to run through the stats. I'm sure you've seen many of them, but no matter how you slice it, whether by gender, by race, by geography, we know that the wealth gap does discriminate. The second is the silver tsunami business succession crisis. So, with nearly 3 million businesses needing to find buyers, we have a need for not only more buyers in this space, but it's the great turnover of ownership that's happening that we can intervene in. So, with these two huge systemic risks to our society, our economy, and certainly to our investments, we know that employee ownership offers an alternative future. And employee ownership itself is very well proven with a strong, strong track record. And its current growth trajectory goes back more than 50 years. We've seen steady growth each year. Somewhere between 5 and 600 companies create employee ownership each year. But what's happening is that growth is very small relative to the overall market of business acquisitions. And it's also not significantly, that growth rate is not significantly increasing. We have reams of data that demonstrate stronger business performance, measurable worker wealth, creation and very low loan default rates for employee-owned businesses. So what we're talking about today is the investing marketplace that layers on top of, the entire space that has been, which wouldn't even be possible without the incredible work of so many people who have been building this field in this space for over half a century. So ownership as an investment thesis with a vibrant and growing capital marketplace focused on employee ownership. So next slide. So the 2025 Employee Ownership Capital Roadmap really is our shared North Star for our space. We consider it to be a strategic compass for scaling employee ownership investing, focused on 4 areas: guiding investment, narrative, infrastructure, and policy. The goal really is aligning around a shared direction and the catalytic growth levers that can move us towards the $10 billion in investment capital by 2040 to transform that proven impact that we've seen over the last 50 years into a mainstream investment opportunity that creates inclusive economic growth and directly confronts the systemic risks of inequality and the silver tsunami. This investment arena is already showing tremendous momentum. If we look back just 7 or 8 years ago, we had only a handful of specialized employee ownership funds. On the next slide. So the assets under management for employee ownership has been accelerating rapidly. So the data on this slide show last year at this time, we released with our partner Transform Finance, the first state of employee ownership investment that showed that a total across combined 27 funds, we had 500 million in assets under management. This year, we're at 865 million. So that's, for those of you who are math folks amongst us, that's a 73% year-over-year growth, which is amazing. And, just to calm expectations, we certainly expect our growth to be lumpy. This year's high growth rate was fueled by 2 larger fund twos being in market and having success in their raises, as well as new entrants coming into the space with larger fund ones than we'd previously seen. So 29 investment funds, all of which create at least 30% of the company owned by the employees within the first few years of investment. Of these 29, 10 are evergreen loan funds, mostly CDFIs and nonprofit loan funds. 3 are independent sponsors, so these are groups raising capital on a deal-by-deal basis, and 16 are closed-end funds. So yet, even with this very exciting growth, we know that our numbers are still very small compared to what Transform Finance has sized as the $1 trillion investment opportunity for employee ownership, and certainly compared to the resources that private equity and private credit, mainstream private credit, brings to bear. So even despite the reams of data of strong performance, employee ownership investing today represents less than 0.01% of the private capital market. So takeaway, massive untapped opportunity with tremendous growth potential in this moment. So the question is then, where do we see this growth going from here? Let's go to the next slide. All right, I'm going to take a minute to just orient you to this graph. So along the bottom, we have what we call the employee ownership capital growth stages. We developed these stages, as Catherine mentioned, looking at the growth of adjacent impact investing spaces. So impact investing writ large, climate investing, gender lens investing. And I'm going to give a shout out to a wonderful team of students from the Haas School of Business who were mentored by McKinsey consultants who helped us with much of this initial research. And what we found was that each of these spaces followed a similar trajectory, right? So getting started, the foundational phase, we have early adopters that are demonstrating the potential. Well, we have advocates and convenings building awareness. Then in the piloting stage, we have small funds launching with early capital, usually more catalytic capital, beginning of shared language developing, early coalitions, early infrastructure. And then we get into the validation stage. And employee ownership, we consider it to be early in the validation stage today, where models are being proved out, the performance of those models and those funds builds the confidence, and the narrative, the infrastructure, and the policy pilots really start to expand. Then from there, we're growing up market, right? Market building is the next phase, broader investor participation, stronger infrastructure, more standardized investment products, and then bridges to more institutional capital. And that's where that scaling and mainstream comes in, where institutional capital engages. We have a very diverse set of products, and employee ownership is integrated really into the broader market. So being in that early validation stage, this is where we have the early funds and the bipartisan policy gains that have demonstrated the viability of this investment market. But really, to make those leaps into the market building and ultimately mainstream adoption, employee ownership needs this coordinated action that we're talking about in the roadmap. Okay, so that's the phases across the bottom. Now for the graph itself. The lowest line here on this graph is the status quo. So this is, no involvement, coordinated action. We're just growing at the pace of a typical private credit growth, which is very moderate baseline growth. The middle line, that darker solid orange line, is the North Star of the roadmap. So getting us to 1.5 billion in the next few years. And by 2040, really, 10 billion as our target with 100 billion beyond that. One of the key takeaways is that we don't believe the ceiling is fixed, right? The more that we work together, the more that we all lean into these strategies, the faster we can see this growth. So the outcomes become not only possible, but much more likely. And so that top line, we're calling it the breakthrough line. And that's where investors, the field, and policy advocates really take up employee ownership investing with an eye towards moving into the mainstream market. And so we see that we can reach more breakthrough levels, maybe 3 or 5 billion by 2030, maybe 20 or 25 billion by 2040. This is, federal tools like the American Ownership and Resilience Act that get passed and implemented quickly that can unlock institutional participation. States replicating proven programs across many, many, many more states. Investors really signaling their commitments at greater scale. The field leaning into adopting shared standards that reduce friction and build trust. All of these can help us move up this curve more quickly. So the main takeaway is that coordinated action is what gets us up the growth curve, regardless of the specific numbers. So with that, I want us to keep this sort of the central motivation in mind as to why it matters so much for us to move up this growth curve. If we could go to the next slide. So not surprisingly, as investment capital grows, so does the outcome of worker wealth. For investors, employee ownership investing delivers a very strong social return on investment, well north of 300%. So just $10 billion invested, which we believe is possible by 2040 or earlier, translates into 30 billion of worker wealth created over time. And that doesn't count the, spillover benefits of that the single stat captures of stronger wages, tax bases, family balance sheets, and of course, the truly life-changing impact of both workplace and personal and family agency. At scale, if you think of this as a $1 trillion market opportunity, employee ownership can deliver north of 3 trillion in wealth and benefits to workers against a backdrop of most of these workers living paycheck to paycheck today. So how do we get there? Well, the good news is that we now have the employee ownership capital compass to guide us. And yes, we've been having fun with the compass and the wayfinding and metaphors in the roadmap. You'll see that. So this compass is really a summary of what we call the 4 action areas: mobilize investment, power the narrative, deepen infrastructure, and advance policy. Now, the QR code on the screen is to the roadmap page on our website where you can download download the document, and then the link was just stuck in the chat if for those of you who haven't yet had a chance to take a look. But I'm going to go into each of them for a few minutes if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so the first one here, mobilize investment. This is about building a visible and scalable market for employee ownership capital. Increasing really the volume, the consistency, and the coordination of capital flowing into the employee ownership funds and the intermediaries that are emerging. As we've said, today employee ownership is a very small and specialized corner of the private markets, and to scale, it really has to become a recognized investment category. So what does this look like? It's things like expanding investor engagement and visible allocation commitments. So tell the world when you've invested in employee ownership, right? This creates legitimacy. It attracts your peers and it helps to normalize employee ownership within investment committees, within advisories, etc. It's about deploying catalytic capital through aligned platforms, regardless of what type of investor, philanthropy, family office, impact focused, right? You can help de-risk new products, seed emerging funds, and buffer some of these early structural frictions. We also need to be standardizing investment models, the ones that have already been proven, and solving and addressing really some of the key friction points, right? We know that seller notes are friction points. We know that personal guarantees are friction points. And this doesn't mean that we are standardizing everything. We still need to have innovation happening across the space. It's building intermediation to simplify investor entry. We see this in other spaces, right? CDFI intermediaries or in the clean energy space, where lenders help professionalize that sector. Employee ownership really needs the platforms and syndication models that allow investors to deploy larger checks more efficiently. And then certainly last but not least is pulling in low cost or credit enhanced capital into transactions. So there's existing federal tools, the Small Business Investment Company under the SBA, the SBIC program, the CDFI fund stands for the Community Development Financial Institution Fund, the SBA's loan guarantee programs. There's state level guarantees in some situations, and then the related bank partnerships that can dramatically expand deal volume. So the roadmap itself contains what we consider to be bright spots. These are successful funds, innovative structures, and compelling narratives that really demonstrate this potential for rapid growth. All right, so that was the first compass area, mobilize investment. Let's move now to the next slide and look at the deepen infrastructure action area. This is about building the backbone for a scalable employee ownership market, the backbone or the plumbing that supports consistent deal quality, reduces the transaction costs, and helps to build this shared trust. Some of the critical gaps and near-term priorities in this area are shared data and benchmarking and reporting frameworks. So if everybody's talking about their work and reporting data, where an investor is like, oh, I can't tell apples from oranges in any way, it just makes it much, much harder for investors to know what to do and where to lean in. So as a space, we need to come together around that. Shared underwriting and diligence tools. Again, when we look at other spaces, this has been a really important piece of helping, have standard templates, model documents, and risk frameworks. Also, communities of practice for fund managers, including a specialized accelerator for emerging employee ownership fund managers. And Ownership Capital Lab will be piloting an accelerator in 2026. This is about continuing to build the field's professional core. And of course, strengthening and scaling the backbone institutions that can deliver this shared language, standards, and investor education and wayfinding, alongside the coordinated ecosystem building and support for emerging fund managers. And then finally, strengthening or developing resources that are needed by all of the employee ownership funds. So, ownership culture, shared services, employee ownership technical providers, the lawyers and the accountants and the CPAs, leadership talent, and even field-wide tech or potentially AI solutions that can lower costs and enhance execution across the market. All right, so deepen infrastructure. Hopefully that gives you a sense of how infrastructure is an area where employee ownership can quickly help to have more clarity, consistency, and momentum. So next is power the narrative. Let's make employee ownership investing really visible, understandable, and investable. In any of us on this call, we know that most investors, policymakers, even business owners, if they even know what employee ownership is, they probably don't see it as a competitive and investable strategy. I mean, hopefully all of us do, but the point is to get everybody else on the same page and to really shift the narrative work is to shift employee ownership from niche to normal. So, what does that look like? Well, shared messaging that is investor facing. So, we need investor facing narrative playbooks. Um, Amplifying the stories, the worker owner stories, the business success stories, the portfolio company stories, and those proof points, right? That are the investment context, impact stories, and data remain really underutilized, and these are powerful, powerful tools for legitimacy. We need to activate those very visible champions. And any of us can be champions, whether you're an investor, a policymaker, a field advocate, or a CEO of an employee owned company, a community leader who can really signal that credibility and broaden the demand. And then finally, there's an element of coordinating this narrative timing, right? So each successful deal and policy win or new fund milestone, right? Those are all moments that we can elevate and activate and use them to shift that narrative. And so really helping to amplify what is coming out from other parts of the space can be very, very helpful. So this strong narrative work can help employee ownership really break through the noise, can attract new entrants, which is ultimately what we need to get up that growth curve, and secure the mind share that's required for adoption at scale. All right, so last but not least is advanced policy. This is where we're focused on aligning the government tools with the economic and social value of employee ownership. So the near term federal and state levers, the way we think about this is what exists already within the government infrastructure that we can take more advantage of. So in that category, I would put the SBIC and CDFI programs that I mentioned already that really are about bringing matching government capital, lower cost, flexible capital directly into the funds or the transaction financing. Also, expanding the SBA's eligibility for the loan guarantee programs and the lender participation, right? SBA backed credit is absolutely key for employee ownership transactions, but today is restricted to majority ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. And that locks out many of the smaller firms that fall below the typical ESOP minimum size threshold of 40 or 50 employees. So taking advantage of what's already there and then getting more access to government support. One of the really amazing things about employee ownership is the deep, deep bipartisan support that it gets. And so there's currently a couple of federal bills that are really important. One is the American Ownership and Resilience Act, which would dramatically expand access to federal capital tools with a goal of crowding in private capital. Another area that is extremely important is reducing or increasing rather valuation and fiduciary regulatory clarity from within the Department of Labor. So that reducing that regulatory ambiguity really encourages more funds and lenders and investors to engage. So those are all at the federal level. At the state level, we know that there are many, many states that are doing really great things to support the expansion of awareness, to ease the barriers, to provide tax incentives, to address the collateral and guarantee gaps, and to even advance procurement and business retention strategies. So Colorado, Michigan, Iowa, California, and many others. And what we need to do is we need to replicate these strategies across more states and have them be comprehensive. The takeaway is that policy is not a supporting pillar. It really is a multiplier that accelerates every other area of the roadmap's compass. So that may feel like a lot, but hopefully this is starting to give you a flavor for the ways that we can collaborate together to move employee ownership investing up the capital growth curve. So what we're going to do now is really talk through the roadmap through the lens of the different key stakeholder groups. So let's go to the next slide. So in just a second, we're going to do a quick poll so we can get a sense of who has joined us today and where we fall across these three stakeholder groups. I'm going to briefly describe each one, so pay attention so you know which one you belong in. The first one is capital allocators. So these are investors, philanthropists, foundations, family offices, advisors, DAFs, institutional LPs, folks who are mobilizing capital across the capital stack from grants and catalytic to market rate and institutional investment, and are both investing in employee ownership and also funding some of this really important narrative infrastructure research and policy work required to unlock scale. So those are the capital allocators. The employee ownership field, give me one sec before we're voting here. So the employee ownership field is funds, membership organizations, TA providers, field builders, and researchers. These are the ones who are building and strengthening the employee ownership marketplace, driving employee ownership transactions, lifting up the stories, developing the data, the standards, the deal supports, and shared services. And then, of course, the public sector decision makers and influencers, government leaders, policymakers, regulators, and public advocates at all levels of government who can really help policy and government be a source multiplier. Okay, so please let's go ahead and jump in and let's see who is here today. Yeah, it's so fantastic to see it coming in. We'll give it just a little bit longer, give everybody a chance to vote here. But what we're seeing is, not surprisingly, the most highly represented group amongst us is the employee ownership field. It's thrilling that we have such a strong representation among capital allocators here in the conversation today. And also, not surprisingly, we're underrepresented for public sector decision makers. I'm guessing the folks who clicked self-represented there are some of the policy advocates that are in our space. So that's fantastic to know who's in the room. Thank you for that. Now, I think we can take the poll down and okay, great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and fairly briefly just go through some high-level recommendations through that lens of who you are, which stakeholder you are. So part of what we've really tried to do in the roadmap is to help people find themselves, because at the end of the day, us writing a roadmap is not going to create change, but people seeing themselves in the roadmap and leaning in and doing things that they might otherwise not have done. That's really what we're aiming for. And so we want, everybody who's on this call today and everybody who reads the roadmap to really be able to find themselves. So we have both a set of comprehensive recommendations and more near-term recommendations in the roadmap that are organized by each stakeholder group. And then we also have shorter downloadable stakeholder guides that are available on the website. All right, so briefly, I'm going to go through each of the stakeholder groups, starting with the capital allocators. So what are your near-term calls to action? If you go to the next slide. So for investors, mobilize your capital. That's numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on your list, right? We want to see that capital flowing. We want to get those early commitments anchored for funds. We want to see blended finance tools deployed, and really signaling the confidence to increasingly mainstream investors. And use your influence and your capital to help both build the demand and the backbone. So elevate success stories and fund the communications, the shared infrastructure, the policy work, all of which help to really expand the investor participation. Okay, so next, the EO field, the employee ownership field. If you are in the employee ownership space, whether you're operating a fund, whether you're playing a field building role, whether you're working directly hands-on with companies to help them transition to employee owned, the most powerful actions that you can take on this collective path to scale are really aligning and strengthening the ecosystem. So as we've said, we need to develop shared standards, data platforms, as well as sequencing strategies that connect the capital flows and engage different types of investors. So today we have very few institutional investors engaged in the space. And if you remember back to that, the growth curve and those stages, that's to be expected in this space. But we have to start bridging in that direction. So that's an example of one of the things. In addition to standardizing the proven models, we have to continue to innovate and we have to expand the tent. So this means designing new financial products, welcoming emerging managers and fresh innovations, and really unifying the employee ownership narrative through shared learning and storytelling. Okay, so finally, I'm going to summarize the most important actions for government and policymakers. There's really strong overlap here with the compass area slide, so I'll keep it fairly high level. But one thing I want to explicitly say is that we absolutely must preserve the existing incentives and the strong, strong bipartisan support. That is critical to anything that we do. So in addition to the areas that I talked about earlier, I also want to mention at the regional and local levels, there's a really important role, especially for socializing employee ownership among business owners and their advisors and that ecosystem. So lifting up local examples of employee-owned companies, focusing on the need for business retention as a priority in economic development, and focusing on the need for businesses to do succession planning at all. So with that, hopefully you've been able to really think about your own role and your own place in this ecosystem. And I'm going to turn it back over to Catherine now to talk about our breakout groups.
All right. Well, we know that that is a lot of information, and there's already a lot of great questions and discussion in the chat. And know that when you do look over the roadmap, it is a 100-page document, goes into a lot of detail, has a lot of case studies and examples. And so this is really broad framing for a kickoff, and 2026 will be rich with events that go deep on a lot of these topics. So what we do want to do, because we know when you show up to events, whether they're virtual or in person, connecting, networking, meeting others, working in the space is really important and is in fact a huge part of activation and growth and scale. We heard from many people in our research that convening in and of itself and people gathering and networking was hugely important for fields like gender lens investing and climate investing to scale. So we are intentionally creating the space to have short 10-minute breakouts. And we'd love for you, we will assign you to a room. You'll be with about 3 people total in each room. And we'd love you to share how you and the organization you're a part of or the fund company can play a role in scaling employee ownership and employee ownership investing. What are you already doing and what you can do more of? And then what do you need? What kind of support would be helpful to you to play a stronger role? And so those are 2 questions. What can you do and what supports do you need? And we're going to pop those questions in the chat as well. And we're going to give you 10 minutes. So if you have 3 people in your group, we strongly recommend about 3 minutes per person. And then we'll come back together and do some closing discussion and Q&A at the end. So you will get a little uh, breakout, and please go into that room and we'll give you a reminder when it's time to come back in. So press join and we'll see you on the other side.
Hey, I got booted. Can somebody put me back in 15? Breakout group 15.
Hey, yeah, just one second. Let me try to do that.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for going through that exercise. I hope that it was meaningful. I know for me, I was loved being in a room with a few people to talk more deeply about what they're able to do, what they're committed to, what they want to do more of, and then what they need. And we want to do one more kind of push on this topic because, again, this is really a collective effort. Ownership Capital Lab is almost a mirror, sort of reflecting what we're hearing and designing this roadmap and to sort of show what does this space need, where are we, and where can we go. But it will not happen by the sheer will of Allison or myself or our organization. And so we want to push us all to sort of collectively collaborate on what do we need and what will it take to get there. So to that end, we're going to put up just for 5 minutes, ask you all to jot down some thoughts on a whiteboard. I don't know if you all have used whiteboards before in Zoom. So if we can pull that up, that would be great. And my colleague Leah, ooh, Dario's already starting, which is awesome. I am a tech Luddite, so I need people to walk me through this. So my colleague Leah is going to put some directions, I think, in the chat, but also show you you can either write your commitment on one of the existing sticky notes and another one of like what I need, or you can so you can pull a sticky note by clicking on it, and one will be created, or you can just use one of the existing sticky notes. And what we would love is if you can take 5 minutes, write down my commitment to expanding employee ownership through investment, and what I need to get there. What are the supports? And if you're willing to write your name at the bottom, please, that would be wonderful so that we can, follow up with you and support you. And also totally great if you just want it to be anonymous. We will synthesize all of this and anonymize it and share with all of you who are here today so you can kind of, again, see some of the collective energy and learning. And this is not sort of a proprietary document. We want you all to be able to see this. So that'll be shared with you in the next couple of months. So we'll give everyone 5 minutes. And if you're a tech Luddite and need more support, just drop any questions in the chat, and I'll make sure that my team, who are technologically skilled, can answer those questions.
Want to comment and say it's really amazing that people just jumped right into the writing in my commitments, like having this group say, "Oh, I'm going to really lean into this and be a part of getting us up that growth curve," is super inspiring. Yeah, these are so great. Yeah, thank you everyone for jumping in and for the detail that you're sharing. So helpful.
So we'll give this a couple more minutes and then we'll close it out. And if you've finished and you're again advanced, feel free to take some time just to read over what other people have jotted down. I'm not sure if the reactions feature is working right now, but you can certainly learn a lot just by reading. Oh, and Grace is saying that there's a lag. Um, I'm sorry, Grace. Leah, I don't know if you can take a look at Grace's message. But if not, absolutely, Grace, we can follow up with you. Oh, Leah sent that to you in the web version too. And we can always send it outwards afterwards if anyone's having issues. All right, we'll give everyone about one more minute. It's hard to cut everyone off, but we know we want to give you all time to ask some questions. And we will share the recording for those of you who have asked. We will be sharing this recording with all of you who are attending today. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining us. If you guys have to leave at the end of the hour, we're going to go for 15 more minutes.
You choppy? I think you got, that's your second? Okay. I don't judge. I'm not a judger. I'm a crudger.
All right, why don't we close this out if we can? Wonderful. All right, and so I'm going to turn things over to Allison to just talk a little bit about our commitments and what we're up to, and then open things up for questions.
Yeah, so it's not fair of us to ask you all to write down your commitments and the play areas where you need help without talking about what our commitments are. We certainly hope that this interactive approach has made it a little bit more fun than just listening to us, or me in particular, drone on and on with you. Um, Ownership Capital Lab, and we are a nonprofit organization, and our role is really guided by the roadmap. The North Star of the roadmap is our organizational North Star. So, mobilizing, getting to 1.5 billion in the next few years, and that 10 billion number by 2040. And we really see our role as helping this field move from promising niche to greater scale, connecting investors and funds and partners around the systems and the structures that make employee ownership really a mainstream investment opportunity. Everything that we do, from anchoring the field to mobilizing capital, building shared infrastructure, including developing the first accelerator for employee ownership funds that will pilot in 2026, building data, financial data benchmarking for the space, innovating capital tools, is about creating momentum and confidence for this market to grow. So together, we can really amplify the narrative so ownership becomes the next big investing movement that it is on track to be. Our aim is simple but hopefully powerful, right? To build an economy where ownership is shared and everyone has a stake in the success that they help create. So on the next slide here, putting real energy and alignment into some level of coordination across this field can deliver outsized returns, not for any one fund, but for all of us. This work has the power to get us where we all want to go faster and together. And over the last year in our work at Ownership Capital Lab, we've had really an extraordinary experience bringing together investors to spotlight funds, to build shared visibility, and to create connections for investors to share due diligence and hands-on experience with each other. And now we are really looking for partners to help us take the next step, building the strong backbone organization that this field needs and frankly deserves. So the remaining portion of our time is mostly going to be focused on, a conversation. So Q&A, and then Catherine's going to share more ways for folks to engage and get involved, both as we continue our work in 2026 and as we take the roadmap on the road through this 2026 roadshow in locations across the US. So when we move together, we move faster. Remember that. Let's hold that dear. We move faster towards our shared North Star of scaling employee ownership's growth and its impact. So let's go ahead and open it up to Q&A.
All right, we have about 10 minutes for Q&A. I know some of you've already asked some great questions in the chat and started sharing resources, but we'd love to hear from you. What questions do you have about the roadmap and how it was developed and our recommendations, or what we plan to do with all of these recommendations or ideas that you want to share?
Catherine, can I ask how you plan to collaborate with other industry players like Transform Finance and all the list of funds that they put together? Like, how do you plan to coordinate and make it easy for somebody to, follow all of your work in a coordinated way?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Thanks for asking that question. So, and everything that I say about our work, I just want to put it out there that we're really, really open to people telling us they've got a better idea of how we should approach things. So I'll just frame my answer with that. But um, you mentioned Transform Finance in particular, and they're a very close partner of ours. We've worked with them on a number of things. The resource that we published together a year ago. I've co-authored a number of different articles with Julie Mentor. We're working on some other projects coming forth, but the coordination with the funds in the space. So we make a real effort to be in contact with all of the funds in the space. That's how we're able to keep our finger on really what's going on for the funds and what their experiences are, what the needs are, and also to be tracking the assets under management or committed capital of the funds. And so, we met over the course of the summer with all of the funds, all of the funds in the space, and we intend to do that on at least an annual basis. And then we're, interested in also hearing from the funds what, if anything, would be useful from around a community of practice beyond just the idea of an accelerator for emerging managers. Um, the one of the things that we will be coming out with in 2020, early 2026 is, and we were hoping to get this launched by 25, but we just bit off a little bit more than we could chew, but is a searchable, sortable, filterable online resource that lists all of the employee ownership funds in the space. And we've gone out to the funds and asked them to share information with us. And then we have been in conversation with both Transform Finance and Impact Alpha about having that data roll up into the funds databases that they host on their platforms as a way to enable the employee ownership funds to have one point of contact so they don't have to be telling everybody all their information, and then we can hopefully feed that and provide that as a service to those funds. So would welcome any ideas or suggestions that anyone on this call has about ways that we can, better accomplish those goals.
And we also we feature these funds, right? We hold spotlights. I don't know if you all have seen that. We've done them every 2 to 3 months. We'll have different funds with different themes come and speak to our lists and growing our network in that way. And then we also have this investor circle that I'll talk more about, where funds come and speak directly to investors, and we encourage shared due diligence. So we're really trying to be a backbone support to the funds, so they're not on their own. Developing, pre-developing, raising. We're really trying to be a backbone for the space. But that's a great question, Dario. Other questions or ideas? Love hearing from all of you.
Maybe everyone's participated out. Too much participation for a webinar.
And I do really appreciate those of you who are already dropping in the chat some ideas of like conversations that could be had or need to be had in your area and ways that we can collaborate as a national organization. We know that a lot of employee ownership and the conversations around it are place-based, and so we understand that we also need to come into place with local partners and work in that capacity as well. There's like the national and the local, and both are really needed. So those kinds of thoughts are really helpful. Um, well, if there's no more questions, we can certainly move into kind of a few opportunities to activate you all. It's the end of the year and everyone is tired. Thanks, Doug. That is a great idea. Conversation among family offices. I love that idea. Yeah, thank you. And we also know that many of you haven't read the roadmap. It came out yesterday and it's 100 pages. And so I do want to say that one of our hopes in next year, we talked about the three different stakeholder groups and the four recommendation areas. So there's various ways to break down this guide and therefore various ways to break down different conversations. So we'd love to have a convening on narrative. We'd love to have a convening on policy. We'd love to have a convening on infrastructure. We'd love to have a call just with a specific stakeholder group. So this is my next step or my next request, which is help us think about the networks you're in, the organizations you're working with. And we have kind of a survey and interest form that will pop in the chat, which helps us think about how we can think like when a book is published, we think about going on a book tour. So we're thinking about next year as if we want to move employee ownership from the margins or from niche to the mainstream, we need to go out there and be speaking with folks. So where should we be? Who should we be talking to? And particularly if you all are a part of local collaboratives, organizations that can host these kinds of conversations or partner with us. We are really interested in growing, not just, we can't just grow capital, we have to meet with people. We have to grow the number of people who are invested in this space. So please let us know and fill out that Roadmap Roadshow survey. We'd love to hear from you. Obviously, we've already talked about, the roadmap and where you can get it. It's in the chat again. And then for those of you who are accredited investors or you work with accredited investor organizations, we do have this growing. Right now, it is a completely free membership. You just sign up and you're in if you're an accredited investor. And we have both investor education from Allison and myself, but also we bring funds in to share and present and pitch and talk about their fundraise. And so it's a way for investors to build a relationship with funds, but also with each other and conduct shared due diligence, which we know is really important and is actually in some ways a barrier. Allison talked about like every new fund presents some new questions. So how do we ease those barriers for the investors and ultimately to unlock capital for investment? So we'd love to have you join the investor circle and we'll continue with lots of events next year. And we also encourage you partner with and invest in employee ownership funds, learn about employee ownership projects. This database is coming out. We'd love to get all your eyes on that next year. And then, we encourage you all to contribute to field building in your region. The state centers are a great place to start. Lots of organizations that are on this call and all the funds. And yeah, if you look at our roadmap, there's a wonderful list between our partners and our advisors and our sponsors and the funds in the appendix. You can see it's a great starting point for who's really involved in this field. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is just to say big thank you. On our final slide, we have the QR code again for all of you to download the roadmap. This recording will be shared out and at least a select group of slides can be shared. But we hope, as we said, this is the launch to kicking off this campaign around the roadmap. And so we look forward to working with all of you. My hope is that we can hear from you. As Allison said, we really do not believe we are the people with all the answers. We believe this is a co-creation process, and we want to hear from you all about where and how we can do better and do more in 2026 with this material. So would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for being here today. It is wonderful. And we will have many more of these next year. Take care.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Great.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Doug. Take care.